Hi there from sunny Leeds. It's trying to be sunny today here in Leeds in Yorkshire. We're going to talk about richer retrospectives, which at William Hill we call better. Now, why did we create a card game for retrospectives? I've always found retrospectives are quite difficult for teams, not in the short term, but in the longer term. I find it becomes a bit relentless for people to keep talking about improving. It can even become a bit depressing talking about your challenges, and people do tend to dwell on the negatives without some help. So this tool is what I might call a talking tool. And it does two things really. It helps teams. Teams they don't have to be teams, but it could be a delivery team, could be a community. Helps them to talk about the things that they want to get better at. And the other thing it can do is allow you to gather some metrics around your different capabilities, so you can make decisions, investment decisions, for example, on where you want to help people with some education or coaching. I find that if you approach that using some sort of maturity assessment, then teams can find that quite negative, and it's not a good way of engaging. So that was another reason why we created this as a nicer way of opening up richer conversations about retrospectives and continuous improvement. Now, as you can see, we created a nice William Hill branded deck of cards, but there's nothing to stop you from creating something much simpler that can be just as effective, maybe just using these simple story cards or post-it notes. On the back of the box are some notes about the benefits, and inside are some instructions. But let's look at what's actually in the box. There's a card that says Our Focus, and I'm going to look at that at the end. But the main thing in the box are these three sets of cards which contain these statements that encourage the team to have their conversation. So the other thing is a set of title cards, rarely, sometimes, always, and often. And we'll see in a minute how these work. I'd encourage the team to take in turns. So somebody in the team would draw this card from the deck and read it out and just say we are a happy team. And then that person is encouraged to facilitate a conversation with their team members to decide where they want to put this card. So let's assume that this team have had that conversation and they've decided that they are often a happy team. They simply place it under the often heading, and then the next person will read out the next card. If you can, I'd do this on the wall and leave it on the wall near the team. If not, you can use a table and then take photographs. If you're split across several cities, which we are, then I'd encourage you to duplicate in each city, but use VC or phone calls to talk about the improvement items. I like the fact that it's a physical thing that makes the teams interact. This is another example. We overlap and operate outside our roles. Now, we're not saying whether we should do that, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. We're encouraging the team to talk about it. And what this example decided is that they sometimes operate and overlap outside their roles. That sounds like a good thing to me. This example says our team is the right size. Often a contentious conversation happens about team size. But in this example, the team said that they believe their team is the right size all of the time, so they don't need to worry about that. This card says we get the time we need with our leadership, and I've heard lots of teams moaning about not getting the time they need from people. This team decided that they sometimes get the time that they need with their leadership. And this brings up a point where what does leadership mean? Well, leadership here means whatever the team wants it to mean. And we'll see another example of that later on. This example says everyone can see how we are improving our team. Now, what we mean by that is that not only is the team improving, but there's some sort of visible evidence of that, which is more complex than it sounds, perhaps. This team decided that they rarely do that. They may be improving, but perhaps they're rarely showing everyone that they're improving. So a view starts to emerge of the cards spread across the headings. And you may have already noticed that some cards you want to be on the left and some cards you want to be on the right, and that's deliberate. It's not simply trying to move everything from left to right. So here's another example, and we're into the next pack of cards now, which are less basic than the first ones. Those were designed for perhaps a new team or a team new to Agile. These yellow and blue cards are now in between being very agile and being new to Agile. So I just called them Fusion, F for Fusion. The confusion around our roles can cause issues. I find that's often an important thing to talk about. And in fact, this team have said that it often causes confusion. We feel overwhelmed by too much work. This team decided that sometimes they feel overwhelmed by too much work. We are proud of how we collaborate with other functions. I find it quite interesting to use the word proud with delivery teams. I think that ideally we should be proud of what we're doing, because that has all sorts of other positive effects on what work we're producing and how much we're enjoying producing that work. So this team decided that they're always proud of how they collaborate with other functions. Other teams have told us that they benefit from our show and tells or demos. This will usually spark a conversation about what is a show and tell, what is a demo. They may be different things, and they certainly mean different things to different people and to different organizations. This team decided that they sometimes get feedback from other teams telling them that they benefit from show and tells or demos. So as you can see, the view is growing, and we've got the two types of cards, the more basic introduction cards, the blue ones, and then the ones with the yellow tops are slightly more complex. I encourage people to change the wording. These cards are not right or wrong, they're just useful sentences. So here's an example. If you were working in the NHS, you probably wouldn't talk about the business in some contexts. You may simply decide that the word clinicians might be more useful. And I'd encourage people just to put stickers on it to change things. There's no right answer. So now we've moved into the yellow cards, and these are purely agile, so you'll start seeing agile language. So you can see here it talks about goal and sprint. We agree a clear and visible goal and use it to prioritize our sprint. I think the first bit of that is quite easy. The second bit is less commonly done well, the using the goal to prioritize. So I'm going to go through all of these a bit quicker now without placing them. We are all proud of our ability to predict our velocity and commit to work. So again, more specific agile patterns here. Are we proud of our velocity? We would have a conversation around that. We get the right people at our regular meetings. And by meetings, we're talking about the ceremonies, so sizing, planning, retrospectives, stand-ups, and so on. So I'm not going to go through all the cards, but you can see the pattern that's emerging, and you can see the way this works. I'd suggest that an hour is enough. So I would just come up with enough statements, enough discussion points to last for up to an hour. You don't need to use all the cards in the first session. There's plenty more cards, and I think it's overwhelming to try and deal with everything on the first attempt. I think to do one session each sprint would be absolutely fine. Maybe pick on one of the three decks in each of the next three sprints. But I very much let teams decide how they want to do this. So I mentioned at the beginning the card called Our Focus. One challenge I found with retrospectives is that you will find people tend to talk for a lot longer about negative things than about positive things. And the other problem I see is that we come away with a lot of issues, and that can make you feel quite negative. So the idea here is to talk to the team and encourage them to decide where they want to focus their improvement effort. You may do a dot vote or just ask people, I tend to say, which is the most interesting card. So this team have said that they want to focus on the card that says everyone can see how we're improving our team. And they just put the focus card on there to literally remind them what they're going to focus on. Another different example here, this team said that confusion around our roles can cause issues. They said that happens often and that they want that to be their focus for improvement for the next sprint. So let's look at an example. This team have decided that that is their focus card, and they've come up with some activities that they're going to track. So they're not going to focus on any of the other cards in the deck. They're just going to work on this one. And here's two examples of things that they're going to put into their backlog. Sarah is going to run a roles workshop. Perhaps Sarah's a coach. It looks like that's going to happen on Tuesday. And then Chris is going to ensure that the team are all happy with their role. And that's an example of an outcome, whereas the roles workshop, I would say, is more of a task. But there's some clear activity here around trying to move that card around roles confusion. So you can see here that if you remember that the confusion around roles card was in the often column. What they're trying to do is move it into the sometimes column. And I'd ask the team, where are you trying to move this to? And how realistically, how soon do you think you can move it from often to sometimes? So we're looking ahead here. They've ticked off those two activities and they've next come back to their next retrospective and they've moved the card from often to sometimes. So they've made some good progress and improved their roles confusion. So that's it. It's really simple. And the more I've used it, the more I've refined the language and the more I find we get richer conversations amongst the teams. I'm really happy to take questions. You can contact me on Twitter. My handle is @AgileLozenge, AgileLozenge. Thank you for listening.